This is the Eye for an Eye channel. Welcome to today's show. What I try to do on this channel is show you repetition and pattern. I say it almost every day, right? And a lot of that isn't just through seeing signs and symbols in music videos. It's also through a pattern in the news where they're constantly preparing you for something to happen. And most of the time, it does happen, right? We saw all the predictive programming with the outbreak over the years, which was why a lot of us were able to point that out. Not just, point that out before it happened, not just from movies, but from the news, from these people who ended up being the face of this movement, forcing and trying to force these things into your body. They were out there years in advance telling you that we needed to do it, it was coming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Well, one of the things that we've heard over the years is about our power grid and about how our power grid, there's multiple stories. Our power grid is vulnerable to an attack, right? Our power grid is vulnerable to a solar flare. Our power grid is weakening by the day, how we're going to need to do all these types of things to rebuild our power grid, right? Well, they're not just going to rebuild the power grid while the power grid's functioning. They want to destroy the power grid. And what comes from destroying the power grid isn't just bringing in, people are like, oh, they're just going to bring in some solar power and et cetera, which wouldn't be able to power any of us because it won't have enough power, which they never tell you with the electric vehicle, right? You're going to have to charge it. You're going to need electricity and power. I mean, it's all just it's a vicious cycle of stupidity that people just fall into without asking questions about this or questions about that. But what comes of it is chaos first, because with the power grid down, it will be a world of utter chaos. People will be losing their minds. People will be robbing, looting. People will be unable to function without a cell phone. So what we're seeing once again with winter coming is a lot of talks about the power grid, not just because of weaponized weather, not just because we're going to see, man-made blizzards showing up all over the place, but they want the other threats out there as well in your mind. Terrorist attack, Russia attack, solar flare, EMP. And we've seen the predictive programming. I'll start there over the years, where it would look something like this with some type of an EMP, which would even shut down your car, which they would call a solar flare.
Listen to me very, very carefully.
Look at that.
It's all going to turn off.
What?
It's going to turn off, and it will never, ever turn back on. Everything is going to turn off.
Ben, did I lose you?
No.
Okay, so that's what an EMP type thing would look like, which I've shown you and talked about over the years. But another thing that we've seen over and over again, and we're seeing it pop up once again right now, is the mainstream media planting seeds in everyone's head. These two videos I'm going to show you are clips from the last 2 weeks where you have liberal media and conservative media preparing everybody out there for the grid to go down. Why are they doing this? Because they desensitize you. They also use what is called sigil magic. They use these things and show you these things in advance and summon it into existence. They put a spell on the people out there. All of this stuff is easy to see. They let you know about it. How long do we need to talk about how bad the power grid is? Wouldn't you think that would be the number one or one of the number one priorities that our government would be functioning on? But it's not. It's not by design. And again, this plays into how they can destroy America, and we're all supposed to fall for it. And that's why Fox News is playing their role when they have articles out there about the greatest threat to America's power grid is not what you think. It's Democrat policies are the problem. And talking about how Biden and the Biden administration is ignoring everything with the power grid. Of course, this is just so that you believe when it happens that it happened because of incompetency, not because evil people were trying to sabotage our lives, trying to kill us, trying to turn us on one another, and then cause utter chaos, literally like the purge in our society. Here's some of the predictive programming and how they're desensitizing and preparing people for a power grid shutdown in the mainstream media.
So what would happen if all of the power in our country went out at the exact same time? Now, this is the question posed in Dennis Quaid's new documentary called Grid, Down, Power Up. And spoiler alert, things would not go that well. Take a look.
virtually every study you'll see has an anarchistic component that leads to rioting. It is almost inevitable.
Imagine what will happen if there is no food, no power, and no money, and no transportation. Only people with guns and the boldness to go and take what they need to survive will live.
It could literally end civilization as we know it.
Cyber attack, an EMP, even a massive solar flare. They're all capable of exposing our power grid as America's Achilles heel.
Okay, what interested you in this? You know, we hear about Go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's something I'd read about and chilled me quite a few years ago. And then David Tice, who I've worked with before, came to me about something that concerned him, too, to make this documentary on our electrical grid, to make people aware of how vulnerable it is. You know, we've only been... before 1920, we all lived in the dark, and I guess we were quite used to it. But if it were happened to a day like a solar flare event or an attack on our substations, them going down, we have blackouts, which we all know and have lived through. But it could take down the entire, at an EMP event, could take down the entire grid of the United States. And within 30 days, we'd be back in the Stone Age again.
Well, walk through where this documentary will take us. If it was an EMP event, electromagnetic pulse attack, which I think I'm hoping and praying and assuming that our government is preparing for, but that would knock out all the power in this country. That's a frightening scenario.
Yeah, it really is. There's three grids in this country, the Eastern, Western, and the Texas has its own grid. And they're quite vulnerable. It would not take much. There's a Carrington event with a solar flare, which in 1859 knocked out all of the telegraph lines, which was about the only kind of electrical thing we had back then in Europe and the United States. And, this means all the refrigeration would go out just like that, all of power stations. We wouldn't be able to have access to food or communication. And, from that, chaos is going to erupt. And it's something we're very vulnerable with. And there's an easy fix to it that we can do now.
It almost reminds me of the Book of Eli with Denzel Washington. That kind of scenario where it just, whoever's left it's just total anarchy. David, what got you interested in this project, and why was Dennis the perfect fit for you?
Well, I got interested in this project because I realized I was a NASA grandfather. When I was making the film, realized my grandkids were 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off. Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem if we don't fix this grid because my grandkids need to live a long life. And frankly, a solar flare, there's a 12% probability every decade that a significant solar flare could essentially take out our grid. So I've been worried about this for a long time. And as far as Dennis, we know everybody loves Dennis, from the Parent Trap to the Rookie. He is incredibly intelligent and, gifted with his knowledge of the system and capitalism. And he recognizes that we have a problem, but he believes in the American spirit where we can fix this.
Yeah, I'm like a mini prepper. I've got 2 huge generators, in part so I could broadcast if, God forbid, such a thing happens. I wonder even if they would work, and I have, thousands of gallons of propane underground for that reason. But when you think about it, I don't think most people are prepared, don't even have enough food, Dennis, to last a week. Never,
right.
And what happens to the food supply? What happens to pretty much every aspect of our lives?
Every aspect of our lives that we just take for granted every day is we're going to have to deal with in another way, and it won't be good. And there's a way to fix this. This is something that our government could do. It's definitely a nonpartisan issue, that's for sure, to protect our substations, sort of like in a way that surge protectors, we have them on our televisions, we have them on our for our computers, we could install these in our substations that would protect us from if an event like this happened.
I'm glad both of you did this because I do believe this is a real threat. And I think you're right. They need contingency plans. And if they don't have them up to date, ready to go at a moment's notice, this country could be vulnerable to attacks that we never dreamed of.
The U.S. warning that Chinese hackers are positioning themselves to attack critical U.S. infrastructure. Eamon Javers joins us from D.C. with some exclusive reporting. Eamon.
Hey there, Morgan. That's right. American officials are scrambling to make sure potential weaknesses in the software used to operate American infrastructure have not been penetrated by Chinese and Russian hostile actors. They're focusing on the threat to so-called open source software, which is developed by hobbyists and others and then put into the public domain. Software companies that make infrastructure systems often use large chunks of open source code in their programs, but the fear here is that hackers could be developing this code, releasing it to the public, and seeding vulnerabilities intentionally here.
We've seen what critical infrastructure, the role it plays in terms of first attack and then, throughout a prolonged conflict in Ukraine. So there's a recent case study in terms of the vulnerabilities and why they need to be studied and why they need to be shored up. But it raises the question, Eamon, why? Why is there all of this open source code in all of this critical infrastructure software?
Well, that goes back to the culture of software development going back decades. Open source has just been a big component of the way software companies build these programs. It's not as if they're writing every line. Software these days is kind of assembled. You grab packets of code that do one task, grab packets of code that do another task, and assemble them all together. And for some of the real common basic stuff, a lot of that is open source. And the software companies can go out and get that for free. So that brings down the cost of producing the software. So that's to everyone's benefit. But over the years, this sort of system has just been baked into the cake, and people hadn't been really focused on the security aspects of it. Now, though, people are starting to become aware of it and trying to figure out what to do now that all this code is embedded in so many systems.
So you see exactly what that looks like, right? And we've had things on 60 Minutes over the years where they've talked about 60 Minutes has done things about the power grid and how the power grid, just a bunch of random people showed up at the power grid with no motive whatsoever and were able to shut down the power grid and turn the power off for millions of Americans, right? These are things I've covered over the years, talking about how they're continually just overly discussing it. And as we move towards 2030, one of the things that needs to be done to have full control in the masses is to be able to control and shut off the power grid. This will cause utter chaos. This will cause, as you saw in the clip from Fox News, right, with Dennis Quaid, as if Dennis Quaid's one of the rare celebrities, there's like 5 you can count on your hand in Hollywood who have to play the role of conservative and are playing the role of conservative, because remember, they need a few of them, but the majority, like 99% of Hollywood, all identifies as communist Democrat, of course, because again, this goes back to the Hollywood blacklist and how celebrities infiltrated communists infiltrated Hollywood so that they could, again, plant seeds into people's minds so they could bring about communism without actually admitting to what they're doing and tell you what it's really about. And that's why we are where we are. So this is the warnings that we're seeing. Electric regulators, and utilities across America are sounding the alarm on grid reliability, yet the Biden administration keeps on hitting the snooze button, okay? So again, we've heard this year after year after year about the grid, even when Trump was in power. All right, they're telling you that the grid is going to be under attack and it's extremely vulnerable. And then they tell you that the presidents and the people in power continue to ignore it. So what do you think that's saying? Oh, these people just let us down. We're all supposed to accept a society where now there's no power, which means that there's no, running water. I mean, the things that come from a power outage, like people don't realize that hypothermia, no running water. That means things won't be delivered because the gas pumps won't be on, so you won't be able to go to a grocery to get food. I mean, it's literally utter chaos. The power grid is the probably would make the most sense for the number one thing that they want to do right away in this next wave of created events by our government would be to take the grid down. A lot of people are like, they're never going to take the grid down because they don't want to break people's programming from their technology. Well, they're programming you now about how the grid getting shut down. They're telling you in advance. Then when the grid's down and there's no power, they don't need to feed stories to people because people are already going to subliminally think that Russia is the one responsible, right? Because how many stories have we heard about Russia going after the grid? Nobody's going to think America went after their own grid. And conservatives are going to think that it's just from a incompetency in the government, lack of competence in the government. They're just incompetent fools, right? Oh, we knew about the grid and all this stuff, and Biden was just worried about genders and pronouns. So that's the mindset that they'll have. Instead of saying, hey, Republicans, Democrats work together to take down our power grid, which is going to result in the lives lost of millions and millions of people. It is. People don't realize what trickles down from it. You know, we think about the outbreak on one hand, right? And how that's a direct way to depopulate. But this is another way to depopulate. Because a grid shutdown causes utter chaos. It causes people, you know, you're looking at cities being destroyed, which is part of the smart city plan, right? When you have, you know, a lot of these clips, we've seen it so many times. We've probably seen it in every couple of weeks a movie comes out where there's some type of chaos in a city where people are looting, burning stores, right? I mean, you could think of thousands of movies. The Purge is obviously the first one that comes to mind, right? Or the Joker movie. We've seen this over and over again. They've prepared people for this because they want people to act in that way when the grid shut down, right? It's a conditioning mechanism. And when the grid shut down and people, like you saw in that clip, don't have food, don't have water, the armed people are going to be, and of course we know that there's smart people who are armed, and then we know that they're literally giving guns to criminals and letting them out of prison because they want them, and they're hoping and banking on them, creating this type of chaotic atmosphere, right? They'll destroy infrastructure, cities, etc. Come in with smart cities, right? People who are, you know, at home and their power goes out and they're stuck at home and don't have a food supply. What are they going to do, right? These people are going to be easily and very, very easily, I should say, herded and rounded up because they're going to need food and water and things like that. So this would be a thing if our government was functioning, our government was working, and our government was actually doing their job, they would take care of. That everybody would demand this. Instead, we see all these other things that are driving people crazy, right? Every dollar that we all make goes to the government, which eventually goes to Ukraine, which gets laundered back in to all these trafficking networks that they have. That's what ends up happening. And then they go, oh yeah, the power grid, you know, and the majority of people, again, they don't believe that they're going to attack the grid because they look at it and they say, well, they don't want to break the mind control of the people. It's a temporary grid shutdown to rebuild the grid. It could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 6 months, but it's going to be longer than a week. It's going to be longer than a month. And I'll have to do separate videos. And again, that's something on the website. You know, people can network and talk about ways to get food supplies, how to survive these types of things. I know a lot of you watch channels out there that talk about it. I don't watch those channels. I don't really watch anything. Most of my time is focused in on making content. It takes a while to make multiple videos a day. So I don't really look at that stuff, but I do have books and things that I've read over the years, and I have a list of things that I have already and things that I still want to get, and time is running out on that. But this is going to be more long-term. This isn't going to be something that happens, and then it's like, oh, you know, my power's out for 3 days because there's a blizzard. My power's out for 3 days because of a hurricane. Okay, well, it'll come back on. You need to prepare long-term because they're telling you that this is going to be long-term. They're, in fact, telling you that the grid needs to be rebuilt. So when they tell you the grid needs to be rebuilt, that doesn't happen in a week or two. That's something that happens over many, many months or many, many years. So you get used to a life with the grid off, and people are like, well, none of us will survive. Well, a lot of people won't survive. And there won't be the news to talk about the chaos and how many people die and things like that. It'll just quietly happen. Nobody will notice except the people closest to them or the people in those towns, right? Nobody knows what's going on other than what they're told on the news in this society, and what they're told is all lies. So they don't need to report on, all these people. You know, they'll give a number, a small number like in Maui, very low compared to what's actually happening because they don't want to be held accountable for what happened. But a lot of people, especially in the winter, will die of hypothermia. You know, they're going to freeze to death. You know, all sorts of things come from not being able to, you know, and what's ironic about it is at the same time that this is likely going to go down, whether it's this winter or next year, but it's going to go down. They're telling us that we shouldn't have, you know, wood-burning stoves, fireplaces in our home because it's bad for carbon. You know, so these idiots out there don't actually see what our governments around the world are telling us, what they want to do to us. They want to remove even heat from our homes and have control over your thermostats and all this other stuff and shut the power grid down temporarily. And of course, they know that what they're doing right now psychologically to the masses is going to cause utter chaos when the grid is down because everybody's grown cold. Everybody hates one another. And all they need to do is just be like, oh, the Biden administration keeps hitting the snooze button. They're worried about other things. And if people knew on the left and right that the government who's supposed to be working for us was sabotaging it deliberately to cause chaos, to have the grid shut down so that everybody's looting, robbing, that all of a sudden there's really, really serious food shortages because nobody will be able to make food, nobody will be able to manufacture food, there'll be no trucks delivering food. All of this will cease to exist. Okay? They prepared you for it with what? With the outbreak, having things missing on shelves. They've been desensitized. Oh, there's no toilet paper. There's a run on toilet paper. Oh, there's no meat, right? They've been desensitizing people. They've been conditioning you for it. And then when it hits, it's going to be a big thing all at once where no one's able to get anything. They could pull the plug overnight. We don't know the day or time they plan on doing it. Could they be doing it on the 4th? Maybe. Could they be doing it September 23rd? Maybe. Could they be doing it in a year? Maybe. But they will be doing it. Unless God intervenes before then. They're telling you they're going to do it, they're going to do it. I'm not saying this to create panic. I'm saying this to you because the signs are out there. The fact that they constantly talk about it is for a reason. They don't waste a second on the air. Somebody to come into CNBC and say, hey, we should talk about how the power grid's going to go down. Right? When they say, oh, yeah, I've heard that one before, and that didn't happen. Because they do it over years and years and years. The longer you hear it, the more desensitized you become to it. And that's how we've gotten to the point, even with the chaos we're seeing with pronouns and kids and all this stuff, is they've just conditioned. And they're conditioning everyone for this grid shutdown. Nobody thinks about why these stories are on the news, right? So what would make them talk about? What would make Dennis Quaid just suddenly make this documentary? We've all heard about this over the years, right? We've all heard because they continue to push this to desensitize you. They continue to push this so you prepared for it. When it happens, you'll know why. They're already telling you why it would happen. Oh, a solar flare is why. Oh, it could be Russia with some type of an attack. So be prepared. Nobody's guarding the power grid, right? How many times have we heard that about, oh, the power grid's vulnerable. Nobody's protecting the grid. Wouldn't you think they should protect the grid because all businesses need powered electricity, all homes need it, unless you're smart enough to be Amish, where you've lived your life not needing this, so you wouldn't even know that this happens? Have you noticed how a lot of these chemical attacks with the trains, et cetera, have happened near major Amish populations? Why do you think that is? Because the people who they know will be able to survive this and won't even be aware that it's happening are people that they want to target so that those people can't lend a helping hand for people out there who are completely incompetent, which I would include myself in, to be honest with you, because I don't know how to do half the stuff they know how to do because I still depend on electricity, and I hate the fact that I do, but we all do. I mean, when you're raised 30 years with it, it's hard to break away, just like these people who don't wake up to what's going on. Right? They've been conditioned for 30 years, so it's hard for them to break away. So I do have some sympathy for people out there who are asleep. That's why I continue to try to do this. Because it is hard to break away from the programming. It's hard to break away from technology for all of us who have grown up and lived on it. The Amish, they never had it, so they don't even know what they're missing. They're not missing anything. Right? They're able to do all these things. They know all these trades. So that's why the government targeted them with a lot of the chemical attacks on the water and on the air in the areas that they are, pollute their food, their crops, etc. Because they know that they'll be able to fend for themselves and they'll, in fact, be able to help communities when this all happens. And they don't want anyone to be able to help. They don't want anyone to have resources. And they literally want to be able to roll the government in to say, here, we're here to lend a helping hand, but you got to come with us. And of course, eventually those will start implementing more and more rules. If you want to eat and have water, you got to have the potion, you got to have the mark, et cetera, et cetera. So we're seeing more and more stories about the grid. We're seeing more and more stories about potential threats because it's coming. So you need to be prepared for it. And you need to be able to see these things in the news. They don't waste a second of the news, especially the national news. The local news, they'll put on a story. If there's a murder in a local town, and even if it's something that's not created by them, if there's a narrative to it, if it's domestic abuse or whatever, racially motivated, yes, they'll talk about it because they could tie narratives into those events. But when they're pushing things like this and you're like, why are they talking about that? They're talking about it for a reason. They don't waste a second of their time to condition and control the masses. I thank everybody for being here. I hope you're all doing well. God bless you, as always, and your families.